All right, so let's try and make sense of both of these stories. One, the Reuters story about Israel possibly halting its active ground operations in 6 to 8 weeks, and the other, a more important one, the vote that is likely to come up at the United Nations Security Council later tonight. Joining me now, Indianaftali is a senior journalist based in Israel. She's with the I-24 News Network, and we'll also be joined by Ostrov A in just some time. He's an attorney and CEO at the International Legal Forum. Indianaftali, let me start with you. First, about the Reuters story saying that the last remaining stronghold of Hamas, which has been described by various Israeli leaders as the last center of gravity, once that operation in Rafah concludes, then the Israeli military could look at actively concluding its on-ground operations in another 6 to 8 weeks. What are you hearing about this Reuters report?
You're absolutely right. We are beginning to see the beginning of the end. However, this doesn't mean it will be the end of the war. Now, we are talking about, there's a lot of rumors of a ceasefire deal going on. There's also this resolution that the U.S. is trying to push, as well as the negotiations going on between Qatar, Hamas, and Israel. But right now, after operations end in Gaza, we are looking at Israel beginning to ramp things up in the north near the border of Lebanon.
I do want to elaborate on the various pieces that are at play here. One, you mentioned this resolution that's likely to come up at the United Nations Security Council. Why has the United States, which in the past has twice voted against such resolutions and backed Israel, are you seeing a change of tone and tenor from the Biden administration?
Absolutely. I mean, all roads are leading to the 2024 election. I mean, this is the year of elections around the world. I believe over 30 of the world's biggest countries will be having elections this year. And of course, the United States is one of them. Now, as this war fatigue is going on in the United States, on both sides, from the Republican side and the Democrat side, as an American, I've seen the tone sort of shift. And we're seeing that in the Biden administration pushing Israel to kind of wrap things up in Gaza because of the effect of Biden voters and how they feel about the ongoing war in Israel, which is against.
I do want to, it might sound like jumping the gun, but if this indeed goes through and the UNSC does vote in favor of this US-moved resolution, what kind of pressure would that put on the Netanyahu government?
Well, because the United States is the biggest supplier of armed weapons and international support towards Israel, Israel is having to bend to the wills and wishes of the United States, despite not wanting to end this war until A, all of Hamas leadership is eliminated, and B, until the hostages are returned. So we are going to see Netanyahu having to hear and listen to the will of the United States, but we are going to see him try to push back against that, as we've been seeing him push back against these ceasefire deals until there are better terms for Israel. For example, the last ceasefire deal negotiation was rejected because of the ratio of terrorists to hostages switching and return ratio.
So where is that negotiation process? I know till last week it was on, and then Prime Minister Netanyahu rejected it, saying that Hamas's offer was quote unquote ludicrous. Are those efforts stalled right now? Are mediators like Egypt, Qatar, even the United States still engaged in those conversations, or is it stalled for the time being?
Absolutely. Things are stalled right now. Things are up in the air. But right now, the hot topic is about the operation in Rafah. And you know, I want to say, the world has been telling Israel you cannot carry out an operation in Rafah. However, just 2 weeks ago, when Israeli special forces entered into Rafah, we saw how they rescued 2 hostages and returned them safely to their families. And that is a huge deal.
Arsen Ostrovsky is also now joining us. Arsen, we were talking about this imminent operation in Rafah, and clearly there is international pressure on Israel. We've heard this from the Biden administration. We've heard this from, folks in the UK, in Germany, that they are concerned about potential damage to civilian life and civilian property when you're going in for such a massive ground operation in Rafah. Walk us through what you're hearing as to whether there could be any caveats or, adherence to international laws and obligations that Israel has as a responsible member of the Committee of Nations before it goes in for this Rafah operation.
Well, Israel has throughout this operation been going above and beyond their obligations under international law to an extent that no army in modern history has done so with respect, and this is not just with respect to the possible operation in Rafah, but through other operations until now as well. They have given advance notice, dropped over 1 million leaflets, made phone calls. They have given weeks notice to various communities, sites, hospital areas, and civilian places to evacuate. No other army in the world does that. Israel is literally telegraphing in advance to Hamas terrorists where it is going and when, and it's doing so to the possible detriment and risk to its own soldiers. At the end of the day, Israel, like India, like any sovereign nation, can, must, and will do whatever action deemed necessary in order to protect its citizens, to rescue its hostages, and to dismantle the terrorist organization Hamas.
I do want to also ask you about where the negotiations are as of now, and it also comes in the backdrop of this potential vote, potential resolution moved in the UN Security Council, which I believe the United States is pushing for, in which A, they could call for a ceasefire, B, the release of hostages, and C, of course, humanitarian aid into Gaza. If the US pushes it through successfully, how may that change the dynamics of this war, Arsen?
So with respect to the US, I think we need to also clarify, because there's been a lot of, I believe, perhaps some misinformation regarding their plans or intentions. The US has spoken about putting forward a possible resolution referencing I think the exact terminology was a humanitarian pause, if I'm not mistaken. This is in contrast to what Algeria is seeking to do, which is an entirely one-sided resolution that does not mention Hamas. I don't believe it mentions the hostages, and sole purpose is to draw out a US veto. But the US has also clarified that whilst this is something that it seeks, whilst it does consider there is some merit in proposing a resolution of its own that may be perhaps more balanced, it is not doing so at this point. And I think that's important to note. It is waiting to see how the negotiations continue with Egypt, with Qatar, with other parties. So whilst the US has expressed some intentions to put forward a resolution of its own, it is not doing so at this point in time.
All right, Arsen Ostrovsky and Indianaftali, thank you very much for joining us with your thoughts and perspective.